We are honored this evening to have with us Dr. John Thomas Spike. He's a noted historian, author, lecturer, and distinguished scholar in residence at the College of William and Mary. Dr. Spike specializes in Italian Renaissance and Baroque art and is an important critic of contemporary art. Dr. Spike has organized exhibitions at many of the world's most famous museums and has lectured at Harvard, where he received his PhD in art history, Yale, Princeton, Oxford, and the University of Malta. He is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Muscarelle Museum of the College of William and Mary. He lives in Florence, Italy, with his wife, Michelle Kahn Spike, and they have a son, Nicholas. And for this evening, we are honored to have him share his vast knowledge of art, and specifically of Seeing Colors, Secrets of the Impressionists. Please welcome Dr. John Thomas Spike. And our next guest is probably no stranger to you. Dr. Aaron De Groft is the director of the Muscarelle Museum. You could say he's come home. He's a graduate of the College of William and Mary and served as a volunteer here while working on his undergraduate degree. He has held professional, curatorial, and teaching positions at the McKissick Museum at the University of South Carolina, Florida State University, and the John and Mabel Ringling Museum of Art in Florida. Under his leadership, the Muscarelle has grown in membership, programming, and exhibitions. Please welcome Dr. Aaron De Groft. And let me apologize to those of you in the back of the room. I hope you can see, but if you can't see, at least you'll be able to hear us as I take a seat and we begin our interview. So I want to start with you, John, if you don't mind, because my first question to you is about your love of Italian art. Why Italy?
Well, that's a good question, Barbara. I am not of Italian descent, but there is a long, century-long tradition of English-speaking peoples falling in love with the art, culture, and pasta of Italy.
Which comes first, the pasta or the art?
Well, those seated near us can make their own judgment.
But actually, you were born in New York City, and
That's
I know
right.
that your parents had a great influence on you in terms of exposing you to art.
Well, I was born in Greenwich Village, New York City in 1951, and that was a moment of great artistic and cultural fervor. And my parents loved to buy the occasional print by Chagall or Dali or Le Corbusier, and they had these at home, and they told my older brother and me that it was important to have things like this, and eventually it sinks in.
So you, as a matter of fact, your brother also is distinguished in that he was the first American to serve on a British paper? Is that,
yes,
did I have that
he
right?
was the editor, first American ever to be the editor of the famous and century-old British humor magazine called Punch.
So, so did you travel a lot as a child overseas?
Yes, we did, because my parents, as soon as my father received $500 for writing a book of theological essays, we would go to Europe with Frommer's Europe on $5 a day.
Wow, there you go. So, Aaron, I want to bring you into the conversation. Why is this particular exhibit, Seeing Colors, such a critical exhibit for the Muscarelle?
Well, the Muscarelle is relatively young. It's not even 30 years old in its existence, and it's had a very fortunate history. As you know, a few years ago, however, there was a drop-off, and the budget was cut by 90%, and the museum almost failed. So given the fact that literally 6 years later, we're hosting exhibitions from the Uffizi, or from the Medici collections, or Dutch Old Masters from Dulwich in London, which is called the best small museum in all of Europe, or exhibitions of the great artist Michelangelo, that's something to be said. The Seeing Colors, The Secrets of the Impressionists, is probably the most important exhibition to come to the museum and its young history. In many ways, you could talk shamelessly about the value of the works of art, but we won't do that. But everyone has an affinity for the Impressionists, and they were beautiful pictures. They are beautiful pictures that most people embrace as such. It's the most commonly and widely known and understood sort of Western art form. If you went out to ask the guy on the street to name 5 artists, they'd probably say Monet, Manet, Renoir, Degas, and we have them all here today.
That's fantastic. So take us behind the scenes a little bit. What does it take to bring an exhibit like this to the Muscarelle?
Well, with all modesty, exhibition like this would not come to the Muscarelle in any given day. This is a series of relationships for which we're very, very proud. The director of the High Museum in Atlanta called literally at the last minute a number of months ago and said that he had a gap in his schedule for his traveling exhibition of Impressionist pictures, and would we be interested? And then he started to apologize, and that, well, it's only in a couple of months, it has to open in October, and you have to have it over the holidays, which, you know, can be a problem. And I said, well, people come to Williamsburg in the holidays. Our attendance actually goes up. The fact that he knew we were nimble and would take the permanent collection down to fit something like this in is also a great opportunity. But my fallback card was, you know, all the other museums that have this show are 10 times our size, meaning they have 10 times the money. Mm-hmm. And finally, it's the philosophy of a hotel room. If you don't sell it, you get nothing. If you sell it even for a little bit, you get something. So his options were have it come here or bring it home and park it. And so for us, this was a huge, huge opportunity for our students and our community to have an iconic Claude Monet here, to have works by the most famous of the Impressionists and post-Impressionist artists, and then to have an American Impression section, let alone the works on paper, which are downstairs. So we made this really a twofer exhibition to fall exactly when would be best for us, and maybe it's just luck.
And also, according to John at least, you and your relationships really pulled this whole thing together.
Well, it was very nice. I appreciate that. I think a lot of people work very hard around here, but in this particular case, the director of the High Museum and I had successfully accomplished an issue that he had with some personnel and some recommendations. So he held us in a soft spot and called us first when we found out, which I appreciate. We were down there a few weeks ago with the director of the Museum of Modern Art, Glenn Lowry, who was the first director of this museum.
Mm. So this museum has a lot of history then. And
It
what is the stature of this museum within the museum world? Are you rising?
We've risen immensely. I mean,
okay.
We've increased the attendance here by over 60,000 people a year. We've added over 700 works to the collection. We've tripled the membership, quadrupled the programs. We've produced 7 books on exhibitions like Michelangelo. I think in Virginia, and this will get me in trouble, I think we're the second best art museum in Virginia.
You want to say who the first is?
At the Virginia Museum. Virginia Museum is ranked 10th in the country.
Okay. Okay, that's fantastic. Don't you guys think you should get a round of applause for that?
Well, thank you. But a lot of people work really hard, and if we didn't have supporters like many of you all here and the work of our board and the college administration, we really couldn't do anything.
So John, as a distinguished scholar, how did you get here?
I was discovered hiding in the library by Aaron De Groft. He followed the trail of 20 books I've written.
Ah, and insisted that you come.
Well, we had some overlapping interests in a scholarship, and specifically it was Caravaggio. Aaron was doing an exhibition of still life paintings from the Uffizi, and he knew that I discovered a still life painting by Caravaggio that was on loan to the National Gallery of Australia, and by telephoning me at discrete intervals of 2 days until I cracked.
That's right.
I gave him the information he needed to persuade the owning society of this painting to lend it to this museum.
Fantastic. And you came along with it.
Well, I...
Almost.
We're smart like that. We reeled them in slowly.
Reeled them in very, very slowly.
Very, very slowly. I didn't see what was at the end of the road. He had, previous to this moment, asked me if I'd be interested ever, because I'd met him when he was chief curator at the Ringling in Sarasota, because my work takes me to all the museums, in the West at least, and he said, would I like to be on the board of this museum? Now this again was a tactical move, because what he was thinking was, I can use John to explain to the non-art background members of our board what it is I'm saying.
Okay, see, there you go.
Right.
Okay, well, then let's talk about Seeing Colors, because you all are doing something a little bit different in terms of this exhibit. Yes, people can come and wander and look amongst themselves, but John, I'll start with you and then I'll go to you, Aaron. You really have some secrets to tell us about the Impressionists, don't you?
Well, we certainly do, because it's a, let's say, life-saving truth that anything about works of art that we all agree on can ultimately be explained. You can discover what it is that makes them all agreeable. It just isn't that fact. And because I've done nothing else for the last 35 years except study this aspect of art, I knew that with this group of paintings, we could use them as a laboratory to explain to every visitor basic traits that they could take away and look for in any Impressionist or modern painting they ever see in the rest of their lives.
Okay, so what are those traits?
Well, I don't know if I could recite all 5, Barbara. That's what my students help me do.
Can you remember 1 or 2?
They're all life-enhancing traits, to tell you the truth. And many of them are the building blocks of what we consider modern art. One is the fact that they, on purpose, make their handling, their hand, the application of the paint to the surface have its independent life, its independent energy of the brushstrokes. Earlier painters whom we admire, Delacroix, let's say, or Turner, Goya, had marvelous hands. The Impressionist painters set out to make this one of the building blocks of their artists. They're saying, yes, I'm showing you this landscape, but I, Seurat or Pissarro or Monet, I made it. That's one of the secrets, the artist's hand. Would you like another?
Yes.
There is the concept of color. It's in our title. In the 19th century in France, science actually was devoting a lot of attention to color, optical effects, and they were making progress in communicating this to the world. And it was a new idea of the 1820s, which is 40 years before the 60s, when the Impressionist painters start trying, and the 70s, when they make their debut. In the 1820s, it is realized for the first time that no color is ever the same twice. Color is always different according to the colors that are next to it. I'm glad we had this chance to share this, Barbara.
I'm fascinated because now that's going to make me look at the painting differently.
These paintings look different in this large room of French paintings because they're on a yellow wall, and the American paintings look different because they're on a cool green wall. And the reason we chose yellow for the French is we found in a letter written by Pissarro. There's 2 superb paintings here in the French gallery. He wrote to his son, who sought his advice about an exhibition he was going to have in London about the wall colors. He said, in our first show, we had white walls around which we painted a canary yellow stripe. I thought, if Pissarro thought this was right, who are we?
Well, I think it's important to note that what John is saying is that artists are using new technology. We can see it today. Michelangelo used the newest technologies he had. But this color theory, complementary color, contrasting complementary colors, these theories on optics were being used by this artist and what they were producing. And when you see these red-green combinations or blue-yellow combinations and they're illustrated in the first gallery, and you come into the room with all the pictures, both the French gallery and the American one, you see them employing these things because you learned about it in the first room. I thought it was fantastic, and most people wouldn't realize that most people think artists, didn't they always paint outside? The answer is no.
I was going to ask you about that, because
Right.
what was going on culturally, though, that made them come out of the studio and go into the streets to paint?
Well, two things really, but artists always went out and made sketches. They would come back to their studios and make finished paintings. First of all, you had to hand grind the paints. You had to add the binder, whether it be oil or egg yolks or whatever, and it just wasn't conducive. But there was one simple answer to this. They put paint in tubes, and it became portable. And you can bring to mind these many films on Vincent van Gogh where he straps on his easel and his paint box and his things, and he heads out in the field. Well, this did not happen in the Renaissance. So we think today, well, geez, painting outside, they do it everywhere. But this was extremely sort of revolutionary at the time. We have a painting in the first gallery by John Singer Sargent that he painted out on the beach in the sand, and they reflect on how difficult that is to do sometimes, but also that you can have the material blown into your paint, which you could find examples of that. But the simple fact of making pigments portable, that was a sort of a new invention at the time, and so today we take paint in tubes as it's for granted.
You want to add to that?
Do you want me to rebut it?
No. Only if you disagree.
I certainly agree. And in fact, this painting by John Singer Sargent is so remarkable, and it's really a little treasure. It's on a small wooden panel, and many of the first works of the Impressionists were on small wooden panels, and they built paint boxes that had sections that closed in on them, and they could put the wet panel inside, close their paint box, and keep the paint surface safe. And in photographs of this painting, we can see the grains of sand in it.
Wow. Well, he just brought the word photograph. This is another interesting point. Photography was invented basically the mid-19th century, and these artists both embraced the camera and also competed with it. They competed with something who could make a mechanical image, right? And so what's the point of then trying to then go and paint, again, a mechanical image? So you see all this infusion of color and light and atmosphere, the fleeting nature of time, the emotion of the artist, the hand of the artist. But on the other hand, John made a point today earlier, the camera also could show you what motion looks like if you expose something. And artists took those kinds of images and employed them in their pictures as well.
In the paintings themselves. So we were having a conversation about this prior to our coming upstairs, but what is it, or what are some of the characteristics of the great masters, the great painters? If you could think just kind of across the board that pulls them out and makes them great compared to others who do art.
Well, there are many aspects, Barbara. And I also, while I enjoy explaining what makes a master's work, I have in mind an expression that a wonderful collector in New York decades ago used to use when I was a student. He had in his collection drawings by Rembrandt and drawings by Boucher and Watteau, and he also had very nice drawings by Dutch and French artists who weren't famous. And I was present more than once when visiting curators would say, "Mr. Wolf, you have such a good eye and you have the means. Why do you have these minor artists with your Rembrandts and Fragonards, Watteaus, Bouchers?" And he would say, "Old Hungarian saying, the generals get the credit, but the sergeants win the war." There is something about the cultural richness of everyone making art according to their own ability, their own point of view, and that leads me to perhaps my favorite element of a great master work. its quality of humanity. In the great masterpieces, something about the state of being human beings is told back to us. And if we have our eyes and ears open, we can see and learn.
So, Aaron, if you and I look at this same painting, should we expect the same emotion?
Let me say this. Let's take this Claude Monet, the British House of Parliament in The
Yes.
Fog, which is the masterpiece of this show. It's an icon of Impressionist painting. And there's also a saying in the museum business. The work on the wall and the person viewing it are important, but it's not the most important thing. It's the space in between. This is that space where people can become engaged in some way. Some people say looking at a work of art can change their life. They can have aesthetic experiences. I think that there are all kinds of ways you judge what you see and how it relates to you, and I think that's what John means about being human. Mm-hmm. Is it some aspect of the combination of the colors, the proportions, its harmonious content? There's all these things. But you asked a really, really difficult question. It's almost as bad as what is art in terms of trying to answer
Exactly.
that.
Try to answer
what makes
that
something
one.
great? Does the value make it great? Not necessarily. It can contribute to that. You know, its irreplaceability. How does it make you feel? I mean, it's a very, very difficult question to answer because people bring different things to what they see. But let me tell you, it's the space in between, because that space is what's charged with what's possible.
I want to ask this question of both of you, and I know that this question does not apply to this audience, okay? But for those who might be a little bit intimidated by art, those who might walk past the front door and say, I don't know. If I go in there, I don't know what I'm seeing. I don't know how I'm supposed to be. How do you make it accessible? What is this museum doing specifically to draw those people in? I'll start with you, John.
That's a very good question, Barbara. I think so, because it's something that deeply concerns me. And one of the things that I say when speaking to a group is I point out that the animal kingdom has sex and violence. It doesn't have metaphor. It is the making of these items, these images, with events and stories that makes human beings unique. And all human beings have an equal share in this adventure. I say to people who have difficulty with contemporary art, for example, I'm often asked, why do I have strongly positive feelings about contemporary art? Not as a whole, according to the works that speak to me. I say, following what I just said, that since only people make art, I treat art with the same respect. When I leave my house in the morning, I expect to treat every person I encounter with respect. I do not have the expectation of making a new friend. So it is with a work of art. I will treat it with respect. It does not have to become my favorite.
Aaron, you want to answer
I
that
think,
too?
you know, there's a serious concern out there with how people perceive images, that we're bombarded with images, whether it's social media, television, whatever. A museum is about real things. And we still believe that the physical nature of an object, whether it's in a science museum, an art museum, or whatever, in this case, an art museum, that standing in front of the thing and how it relates to your size and your perception is still incredibly important. Now, we try to go back to the ancient origins of what a museum really is, and it's a place for study and learning and debate. That means you have to have people there to do this. And there's all kinds of ways. And in fact, using social media and shameless promotion, we'll say, is a way to break down the barrier or open the door, let's say. Mm-hmm. We'd rather people experience art in some ways versus not experience it at all. But a museum is really about the thing. It's preserving this thing, which is a document of a certain moment in time with the context and history around it. That's being preserving. You're preserving that thing for the future. Now, there are some theoretical arguments out there that we could turn everything into digital images and make them as real as possible. But for now, the idea of having people come to experience the the overall space and the ambiance of the.
You know, you bring up a very good point, though, because as you look on your website and you click on the images, but when I walked in the room and actually saw the paintings, it's just two
very, very
totally
different.
different things. We're going to take a couple of questions from our audience, but before we do, I have one last question for you, Aaron, and that is, when you worked at Ringling, I was reading that that John Ringling left a gift of European paintings collections, but yet he also had a circus. And I'm doing this to myself.
Yeah, I wrote a book about
Where did those two things come from?
Well, it's awfully nice. No, I wrote a book about exactly that. How did this circus guy collect old master paintings from Europe, build an Italian palace in his front yard, and leave it to the people of Florida? It's one of the greatest European old master paintings in the world, certainly in America. Wow. Yet in the listing of the famous magazine Art News of the top 100 collectors in the history of America, he's out of the top 100. Yet the collection's worth about $1 billion.
Wow.
It goes back to a simple word equation. Ringling equals circus. And people can't jive the fact that he lived on Park Avenue, offices on Madison Avenue, had oil wells, ranch land, 7 railroads. On his wedding certificate or his marriage certificate, they said occupation. He wrote capitalist. He didn't see him. He didn't see himself just as a circus man.
Circus guy.
Because in reality, when he and his brothers shared the aspects of the circus and the Ringling Brothers Circus, he's also on the America's Cup Sailing Committee, and he was one of the leaseholders on Madison Square Garden. It's a great story of an American success that really most people don't know, because people only associate Ringling and the circus. The family, it's had the same name and owned by only 2 different people, technically 3, but 2 people. And while he was specialized in railroads and marketing, he sought to reinvent himself as a cultural gentleman. After growing up in McGregor, Iowa, only finishing the 6th grade, his parents were immigrants. But the reality of the circus, remember the Barnum and Bailey Circus merged with the Ringling Brothers Circus in 1907. This was the greatest entertainment empire in the history of the world until Hollywood. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of miles traveled every year. They moved to town every day. And Ringling knew a lot about escapist mentality. You could pay a quarter, come out from your Dust Bowl house into this place that was like you were on the moon, because it was magic. Otherworldly, and it took you away.
Wow.
And so it's actually a fantastic story. But basically, he left this legacy that he wanted to be remembered by, not simply only be remembered by the circus. And that is a big Italian palace with gentlemen's pictures.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Aaron De Groft and Dr. John Spike. And we have a few minutes for some questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, you just want to raise your hand. Yes, sir.
Is this collection all drawn from one source?
Yes, they're from the High Museum in Atlanta. And they put together the works on paper downstairs, the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist works, these Impressionist paintings, and the American Impressionist works, and they were traveling around for a variety of reasons. So yes, they're all drawn from the High Museum in Atlanta.
But they didn't come from somewhere else to the High Museum.
Oh, yeah, they were, if you read the labels, they were given, they were acquired and bought. So yeah, they bought them through galleries, they acquired them through gift.
Their permanent collection.
Yep, part of their permanent collection. Right.
Anyone else? Do you have a question, sir? I know your wife's over here doing this, so. Do you want to ask a question? No? Okay. Anyone else? Oh, yes, sir, in the back.
What do we stand to lose by the lack of exposure of art to our elementary school students in America?
Did you hear the question was, what do we stand to lose by the lack of exposure to elementary school children?
We stand to lose a lot by the lack of exposure to art to children and adults of all ages. I followed this field in part certainly because as a New York City school kid, they took us on trips to the Museum of Natural History and to see the Egyptian works in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it was rather like the experience of being let into one of the Ringling Brothers' tents, I guess.
I have a very relevant example of this. If you go to YouTube and pull up the TED Talks, Sir Kevin Robinson, this is something we're working on with the school system here today. They asked a group of people to think up as many possible uses of a paperclip. And if the first group studied thought up 1,500 uses of a paperclip. That same group, a number of years later, thought up 200 examples of a paperclip. And that same group, a few years later, thought up 50 uses of a paperclip. The 1,500 was considered genius status, and they were kindergartners.
Wow.
They then measured the same kids in 3rd grade and 6th grade, and this is an eye-opening thing. I think creativity and divergent thinking is what happens around a lot of art, and we need that as a left brain and right brain balance. You know, we have art collections in the law school because the study, it balances out the academic study, with the right brain work with art. So we think we're just turning out better lawyers.
As a matter of fact, you utilize the museum with students on campus. You make a effort to bring them in and to utilize them, right?
Barbara, I'm glad to see that you and I share telepathy. Because I was thinking to myself, we haven't said the most important aspect of this exhibition, which is when the possibility came to Aaron De Groft and he was poised to undertake the negotiations and organization necessary to bring it, he asked me if he thought that we could do it. Could we, with our small college museum staff, do justice to an exhibition of this ambition? And I said, we will turn my museum seminar in the fall semester into the education staff of this museum. All of the written materials that you see on the walls, that you see in the handouts, that you read online, in a class blog that was kept, the music station, and tours are done by the 16 students in the museum seminar, all William and Mary art history majors, also some art majors, and they made this possible.
That deserves a round of applause. I believe we have time for one more question before we turn you loose to the heavy hors d'oeuvres and wine downstairs and the opportunity to view the exhibit. So anyone have a final question? No one? Then, gentlemen, thank you very, very much for this explanation.
To everyone who's come this evening.
And we hope that you all will now, unless you have anything else, Victoria? Enjoy the exhibit. Everyone enjoy the exhibit, enjoy the festivities, and happy holidays to you.